Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the second evening of Outside and Active. My name is Susie Chan, and I'm going to be here to guide you through the evening. We've got a brilliant lineup of talks. Let me tell you a little bit about Outside and Active. We are a space for everything outdoors. You can come here as a resource to find out about walking, hiking, camping. In fact, every evening this week, we're going to be broadcasting live, bringing you some really fascinating guests. Each evening has a theme. So last night, you missed day one of adventure. We had some brilliant guests. The very famous Ben Fogle. He's done all sorts of things. He's been done the Mouth of the Saab. He's obviously very well known on TV. He had a great chat with Mike Seaman, who interviewed him, telling him all about how his lockdown has been and plans he's got for the future. We also had a chat with the brilliant Katie Jane Lapiniere. She had a fantastic story. She has hiked the entire length of the Great Wall of China. She's cycled the full length of the Tour de France unsupported. Really fascinating lady, very, very outdoorsy, and a really fantastic story. We also, one of my favourite chats from last night was the brilliant David Lindo. Urban bird watching. He was very passionate about getting people connected with the outdoors via bird watching. And then we rounded off the evening with the brilliant Sean Conway. If you haven't heard of Sean, he really is an interesting person to follow on social media. He has cycled, swam and run the entire length of Great Britain. All of those talks are now available online. So if you want to catch up with anything you missed last night, they are available. Also, I'd like to bring your attention to, we've got a chat box. And later on this evening, some of our guests are going to be answering some of your questions. If you have any comments, anything you'd like to add, ask me, or anything you'd like us to cover, please pop it in the chat box and we'll see if we can get talking. But let's have a look at the lineup for this evening, who we've got to look forward to. We're starting off having a chat with Dwayne Field. So you might remember Dwayne from, he has walked to the North Pole. He was the first Black Briton to walk to the North Pole. Absolutely fantastic. And also he is a patron for the Scouts. So we're looking forward to hearing his story, which is a change of direction. And also after Dwayne, we've got brilliant Jenny Tuff. Now, Jenny Tuff, I have been following her for absolutely ages on social media. She is fantastic. She is an adventurer and an endurance athlete. You can often find her in the mountains. And then following, actually, alongside Jenny, we have Alex Roddy, a writer and photographer. He has a passion for the wildlife and he has done some astonishing long-distance backpacking journeys in places which just sound absolutely extraordinary. Looking forward to having a chat with those two. And you can actually have a live Q&A with both of those. And then we're going to follow up with Nicholas Crane. You'll probably recognise him from BBC Coast. He's going to be talking to us a little bit later on. And then we're going to end the evening with a nice virtual walk. So that's what we've got to look forward to. Let's start off with Dwayne's talk, Change in Direction.
Hi all, thanks for joining me, Dwayne Fields, on the Outdoor and Active online festival. Unfortunately, we couldn't get together this year like many of us, all of us hoped, but we're going to keep it going. We're going to talk about the outdoors. We're going to plan for what we're going to do when we can get back out there and active. And we're going to make the most of a bad situation. So I'm going to tell you my story, why I love the outdoors, where my passion for it came from, where I see it going, and what I'm probably most looking forward to when I get back out there. So here goes. I was born on a tiny island, an island called Jamaica. A lot of you probably know the island from, I don't know, Usain Bolt. You've probably heard of Blue Mountain Coffee or reggae music, Bob Marley. But there was me as well. I was born on tiny island of Jamaica in a rural part called Linstead. In fact, it was just outside of Linstead that I was born. And I just remember being a 3, 4, 5, 6-year-old kid and having all the freedoms you could hope for in regards to being outside. Now, in Jamaica at that time and in that area, if you were a kid, you were expected to be outside. There was no lazing about the house. There was no playing computers. Definitely not for me, because we didn't even have electricity in our house. There was no, you weren't expected to be hanging around inside the house. You were expected to be out the house, doing something, either making yourself scarce or making yourself useful. For me, it was always making myself scarce. I remember spending literally from morning all the way through till near enough sundown outdoors, climbing trees, playing in the woods, playing in the fields, the forest near my house, just out there. If I could find an insect for the rest of the day, I'd be studying this insect. That would be my new. I famously, I think everyone that knew me at that time knew me as the weird kid that's always got an animal with him. And I remember one point I had a parrot that was either on my shoulder or in my pocket, a baby parrot, a young parrot. And I had a pig, a cat, and a dog following me around. So I definitely owned that title. And just being outside in an environment like that, I felt like I was master of everything that I surveyed. I knew what plants to eat. I knew what trees to avoid or what plants to avoid. I knew where you'd likely get stung by plants and animals or ants or whatever else was out there to bite me. I knew exactly where they were, and I knew how to avoid them, and I knew how to hunt and find food. And I just felt like I was in charge of everything I saw. My confidence was all the way up here. When I first came to London, I struggled because I didn't have that outdoor space. In fact, I struggled so much that I became less confident. I became almost an introvert. I struggled to make friends. And it was, in fact, my passion for the outdoors later in life that took me down a path where I managed to make a lot more friends, become slightly more confident. And I'll tell you what happened. So here goes. So after arriving in London and I struggled to make friends, I realized that maybe I didn't fit into this new world. I didn't know what the best cartoons were. I didn't know who the best cartoon characters were. I didn't know what TV program to say I liked because I'd never watched TV before. The one thing I did know was I knew I had a passion for the outdoors. I knew I had a passion for wildlife. So I remember this incident when I was like 7 years old. I was in infant school. It was still the first couple of weeks, maybe a month I've been there, struggling to make friends. And I went into the school gardens thinking, right, Dwayne, you don't know anything about TV characters and cartoons, but you know what? You love insects, you love wildlife, you love the outdoors. Maybe you can use that as your conduit to make friends. And I remember going into the school gardens and I dug around in the school gardens and I found a handful of insects and woodlice and whatever else I could find. And I ran over to a group of kids thinking, right, I'm going to teach these kids about wildlife. I'm going to get them to love insects and animals the way I do. And I ran over to this group of kids and they looked at me, looked in my hands. And of course, I've got a handful of dirt and insects and all sorts. And they screamed and ran away and left me standing in the playground with this handful of like misfits by their standards. And at that point, I thought, right, Dwayne, you're doing something wrong here. Your passion for the outdoors isn't what everyone has. And maybe you should just do what everyone else does. Play the games they play, stay away from the woods, don't climb the trees during break time. Just do what they do. And I tried it and I tried it and I tried it for many, many years. And the truth of it is, for many, many, many years, I was really unhappy, not feeling confident, not feeling like I could find a place in the outdoors for myself. And eventually I remember me and a few friends were driving through Epping Forest. And I don't know what came to me. I just, I can't remember if I asked the car to stop or if we stopped for a reason, but I just remember the car was stopped in like a lay-by in Epping Forest. And my friends got out and I remember I got out and they stood by the car and I started walking into the forest. And in about 2 minutes, I couldn't hear their voices. I couldn't hear traffic. I could just hear the sound of the trees and the breeze, and I could hear a few, it was probably magpies or whatever it was. I just heard a few wild animals in the distance. And for the first time since arriving here in the UK, every single thing was calm and quiet and felt natural. And I felt like I actually belonged in that spot at that time. And maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes passed, and I started to walk back. And when I got back to the car, I said to the guys, like, isn't it calm out here? And they couldn't understand what I meant because they were still in a space where they could hear traffic and they could hear each other talking. They could hear engines and car horns. And for me, that spot, that moment there reminded me that the peace and the need to feel like I belong somewhere existed and could be fulfilled, and I could reach it, I could get it. And from then, I started to spend more time outdoors in woodlands. I started to spend more time in fields and, hiking. And I never feel at home as at home as I do when I'm in these natural environments. So for me, the outdoors is a very, very, very personal space, but it's also one that I'm intent on sharing, getting more people involved in. I work with organizations like Ordnance Survey, I work with Scouts, and it's all about me trying to get more young people, especially, but people across the board, out into these environments so they can find a moment like I found. There's been so many studies. So I study psychology in university. I've read so many studies that say natural environments are great for your health. They're great for your psychological, your mental well-being. They're great for your physical health. They're even good for your eyesight. It's absolutely the best place to be outdoors. And I genuinely cannot wait until we can get back out there. Now, I know the outdoors is powerful. And I know green and natural spaces or natural spaces across the board is a powerful thing. I know it has the power to change behavior, because I've been working with young people for a long time now, and I've had experiences where I would take a young person out of a city or out of the city environment that they're used to, and this could be someone who's never been out into the countryside before. And the moment you take them out there, they're in this natural space, and you say, right, guys, everyone, we're just going to take a moment and just listen and see what we can hear. The moment you take them out there and you pause and they start listening, and they're looking around, expecting to hear I don't know what, but they're looking around, and then all of a sudden it dawns on them, hold on, I can't hear anything. There's that moment of, oh, it's silent, and then they listen again, they're like, oh no, but I can hear the breeze, and I can hear the trees, and I can hear the birds, and I can hear something else. And that moment is the most valuable moment of any experience you can have as an outdoor instructor or as a mountain leader like I am with a young person. The moment that penny drops and they get it. And I always notice that after that moment, they're much more approachable. There's not so much of a facade. They're not the tough girl or they're not the tough guy. They're not as mouthy. They complain, but they don't complain to you or about the environment. They complain about being tired or, I feel aches and pains, but generally, it's, I didn't know this is what it sounds like. And you remind them that actually this is what nature sounds like. This is the natural sounds. When you're hearing car horns and you're hearing engines and you're hearing sirens, all those are constructs and all those are ambient noise, which are designed to heighten the senses. You hear a siren, it's designed to alert you. It's designed to tell you, get out of the way, stress you to a degree. These natural sounds, we've evolved for tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years to recognize these sounds. And it's interesting because if you hear a bird singing calmly or singing in a tree above you, you instantly feel slightly safer. And you feel slightly safer because, again, evolution we've evolved alongside these animals, so we kind of see them. We might not see it consciously. We kind of see them as an extra pair of eyes above us. If that bird's not singing, or if it starts to give an alarm call, we can identify that. So as long as it's not giving an alarm call, we know we're safe. And that's how we kind of sync with nature, which is a brilliant thing. When you're out there and you can hear a bird singing, and you can hear when that changes because a fox is, crawling around in the grass somewhere, you really pick up on that. In terms of young people, I remember this one incident where I took a group up to Scotland as part of something I did called Street to Peak. Now, for me, this was fundamentally probably one of my greatest moments. And it was my greatest moments for a number of reasons. I took this group of young people who generally hadn't left London before, gave them some basic skills at Gilwell Park, which is the home of the Scouts or head office of the Scouts. And then we headed up to Fort William in Scotland, the Red Squirrel campsite. And I remember these young people were soaking from the rain. They were freezing cold. And this one guy in particular, I was walking past and he had his phone in his hand. He said, Dwayne, my dad's on the phone. And I looked at the phone. I said, how are you doing, sir? I'm glad he's with us. He's doing really well. He's made it through all the, the training. There's no reason why we're not going to walk to the top of the mountain, and no reason why he's not going to leave here feeling overjoyed, elated, more confident, the ability to achieve anything that he sets his mind to. And the moment I said that, this young man's dad said, oh, do you know what? I'm so proud of him. This is the first time I've ever. And before he could finish the sentence, I noticed that the boy's face broke. And he paused and his face dropped and he started to look down and his eyes started to fill. And for a moment, I didn't understand why. But when I handed the phone back to the young man and I said, look, tell him how you feel. Tell him that you're proud of him. And I could hear his dad saying, yeah, I'm just so proud of you that you stuck this one through. And I could hear his dad's voice breaking. I remember thinking, hold on. This is possibly the first time this young person's ever heard anyone say they're proud of him. And the most amazing thing about that was this is the first time his dad has ever said he's proud of him. Now, I've never heard those words from my dad, so I took a lot from that. I was like, oh God, pride, dad, this young person. I think I vicariously took some of the pride that the dad held in this young man, and I took it up on myself. I felt some level of pride as well. I felt like I'd pleased someone. I felt that secondary periphery joy of someone saying they're proud of, which meant the world to me. And if it meant that much to me, I could only imagine how much it meant to this young man. Now, I keep up to date with what many of these young people do and how they get on. And I've heard some really positive things about them. And one of the best things I've heard is one young woman who, again, it was on the same expedition, which was supported by Ordnance Survey and some of the other Get Outside champions. She got a job, I think, the week after we got back from Scotland. The reason she got the job was because all her examples of, tell me a time when you've had to overcome something. Tell me a time when you've had to work towards something. Tell me a time you've worked as a team. These examples were all born of this expedition to Scotland. And it was all born of her saying, well, actually, I don't know what the outdoors are like, but I'm willing to give it a go. That's the power of the outdoors. I've seen young people clear their mind. I've seen adults clear their mind when they get out there. And I use it as a space to contemplate and to overcome challenges that I have. So when I feel down, I go for a walk in the woods. I go for a walk up a mountain. When I feel down, I'll head out to the Chilterns or Surrey Hills, or I'll head up to the Peak District, or when I could, of course. But for me, it's a space that's almost empty, and it's a space I feel very comfortable in. And I for one, cannot wait until we can get back to the stage where we can go out as groups, or we can go out there and overnight, or we can go out there and just walk for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hours at a time and just enjoy the space. I think there's been a number of positives, I think, that's come out of coronavirus, COVID-19. The number of deaths has been horrible. When I think of 120 plus thousand people, I always catch myself and I always have to remind myself that, hold on, we've been counting the numbers up for so long that we need to kind of remember that each one of those numbers is a person, and that person has a family, and that family has an extended family. And those are 120,000 individuals that's gone on to touch maybe 10, 12, 15 other lives instantly. So when you do the numbers, there are millions of people who are hurt by this. But I think the good that's come out of this really dark time is, I think there's a new appreciation for the outdoors. I think we've got more people who I hope will be flooding into parks, and I hope will be flooding into green spaces, and I hope will be making more use of our woodlands and forests around the country, because we are very lucky here in the UK that we've got so much green spaces. And I know when you live in a city, it's tough to believe it, but I think only 3% of the country's paved over. That means we've got 97% of waterways, woodlands, farmlands, just outdoor green spaces that we could potentially use. And I think, if nothing else, we might see a surge in a number of people going out and spending time in these places, which would make me happy, because my first experiences were in these spaces, and I think they've played such a huge part in shaping me as a young person, as a kid, as a teenager, or especially later in my teens. They played such an important role in shaping me, and my career is in the outdoors now. So it's definitely played a huge part in my life. And I want to see other people benefiting from it, because honestly, it's the best thing to be outdoors, come rain or shine, in the woodlands, in a field, in a forest, up a hill. It might feel horrible at the time, being soaking wet and maybe even freezing cold. But the moment you get home, you get that secondary joy, which is, oh, glad I did that. And that feel-good factor releases so many hormones, which go a long way to improving health. And I think we're going to be taking a long, hard look at our health going forward. And I think part of the solution is more time in the outdoors, which I can't wait to see more people out there and just walk past and say hello and maybe give a fist bump or a high five to. So that's, for me, that's the real power of the outdoors, having the ability to get out there, however you get out there, and just spending time absorbing what's around you, the sounds, the sights, the smells, and just enjoying it. I mean, it's so difficult to just go for a walk in a big city like London, where you're not exposed to noise and you're not exposed to pollution. So the outdoors is the ideal place to go and get your exercise. Now, I believe it so much that at the end of this year, I'm taking, with my teammate Phoebe Smith, I'm taking a group of hopefully 20 young people to Antarctica on the world's first ever carbon negative expedition. And I'm doing it because I want to give a real boost to the next generation of outdoor ambassadors. I want young people to start seeing the outdoors as a viable career choice. And we're going to be doing this expedition. It's called, it's part of the We2 Foundation that we set up. And we're paying all the expenses for these young people to do some training here in the UK and then to get down to Antarctica. And I said it's the world's first ever carbon negative expedition of its kind, because that's exactly what it is. We're going to be encouraging the young people to get out there in the woodlands, and whether it's thrashing brambles or clearing up a meadow or rewilding a space or planting trees or removing the plastic sheaves from trees that were planted 2 years ago, we're going to get them active in local initiatives. So if you are looking for some, just check out the National Trust, the Woodland Trust, Scouts, Ordnance Survey, or check out my socials. I'm always posting stuff, which is just at Dwayne Fields in absolutely everything. I'm always posting stuff about what you can do and organizations that need support and help in regards to the outdoors, carbon offsetting, and carbon reduction. So please check that out. For now, I'm going to stop talking and just encourage you guys, as soon as you're able, just get out there, and hopefully I'll see you on one of my walks and be able to give you a fist bump or a high five or a distant nod. So get out there whenever you can, however you can. Believe me, it's worth it.
Thank you so much to Dwayne Fields, their BBC Countryfile presenter. Really fantastic talk. I just noticed in the ads there for Phil bars. Now, I have developed a bit of a habit with those bars. They're absolutely delicious. I cut it down to just one a day, but I do urge you to try them. They're absolutely delicious. Whilst I'm here, I'm going to remind you about the comments box. We have got a chat coming up with Jenny Tough and Alex Roddy, and you're going to have the opportunity to ask them any questions. So please, if there's anything you want to ask them about hiking or walking or even the great outdoors, pop it into the chat and we'll see if we can get your questions to them. So they're going to be talking about preparing and undertaking a long distance hike. There's nothing these two actually don't know about hiking. I've got a little bit of their background CV here in front of me. Now, Jenny Tough, a writer and adventurer, she is no stranger to endurance challenges, particularly in the mountains. I've been following her on social media for quite a while, and she's always seems to be other side of lockdown, somewhere incredible and somewhere which looks incredibly challenging. So she's done the Silk Road mountain race and also travelled along the Atlas Mountains. And she's going to be joined by Alex Roddy. He is a photographer with a passion for the great outdoors. He has hiked and backpacked huge long distance trails from Cape Wrath to the Haute Route Pyrenees. And it says here in another life, he's a winter climber based in Glencoe. I want to ask him a lot more about what makes you a winter climber. So any questions about that? The theme tonight is walking or hiking. And as we all know, in the last 12 months, we have been stuck at home and doing an awful lot of walking and hiking. If you're like me, I've been out walking virtually every day as well as running. So any questions? That's our theme tonight. But with no further ado, we're going to hear from Alex Roddy and Jenny Tough.
Hey, I'm Jenny Tough. I'm an adventurer and writer, and my bag is particularly in long-distance human-powered adventure around the world, but particularly in mountains. I do a lot of running, cycling, paddling, skiing, whatever I can get my hands on. And I'm on a project at the moment to try and run solo and unsupported across a mountain range on every continent. I've done 5 of those adventures so far. The first one was Kyrgyzstan, the central Tian Shan mountain range. And it was really exciting when I picked this project for me personally, just because I found out that it had never been done before. No one had ever run or walked, man or woman, across Kyrgyzstan. There was no route, no trail, no guidebook. So I got to play expedition and actually have to figure out how to do this, how to design a route, how I was going to survive, how I was going to pack my kit to be able to run with everything I needed to survive in really high altitude mountains for 1,000 kilometers straight. And I was really excited by this world first aspect because it feels like everything's already been done and there's nothing left that you could be the first person to do it. And, you know, maybe I should have spent more time reflecting on why no one had run across Kyrgyzstan, but I figured that out as I went. So because it had never been done and because I had to, you know, work really hard to make sure that this was going to go, that there was no notes, there was no one who could guide me through this process. Fast packing wasn't really a term back then. So it took a lot of trial and error to get my kit right. But I worked really hard and I spent a lot of time looking at maps, looking at satellite images, trying to design my route. So when I landed in Bishkek, the capital of Kyrgyzstan that summer, I was actually really confident because I knew I'd done my homework and I was really fit and I was really prepared. And the only thing I had to do when I got there was spend some time acclimating to the altitude and pick up gas canisters because I couldn't fly with them. So I went to the mountaineering office in Bishkek, which is just this really small office with old Soviet ski equipment, and to buy my gas canisters. And the guy there asked me what my holiday plans were in Kyrgyzstan. So I just told him, you know, I'm going to run across Kyrgyzstan. It's going to be 1,000 kilometers. My backpack's about 10 kilograms. I got a tent. It's going to be great. And this guy just looked me up and down and just went, no, that can't be done. Kyrgyzstan is way too big. There are mountains everywhere. There are no hotels out there. Like, just no. But obviously I had a lot of spare time because I need to acclimate to the altitude. So I took him on. I was like, trust me, man, it can be done. I'll show you. And I took out the map that I designed my route on and I kind of traced my finger along this map of Kyrgyzstan, showing him which mountain passes I would use, which towns I would resupply in, and what handrails of rivers I would use and stuff like that. And he followed along, and at the end of it, he went, you know what, actually, that's a pretty good route. I do think it goes. And so he resigned. He said, you know what, actually, I do think someone could run across Kyrgyzstan, but, and the way he delivered this line will ring through my ears till my dying day. He said, someone could probably run across Kyrgyzstan, but not you. And he made it really clear that his impressions of me were entirely based on how I looked. I mean, I was this 28-year-old girl with pink nail polish. I didn't look like the type of person you expect to nail a world first expedition. You know, it hadn't been seen before. It wasn't the type of person he expected to walk into his office that day. And he was pretty harsh in his feelings towards my abilities. So I kind of brushed him off and just thought, you know, we meet mansplainers every day. That's fine. But I came across that my entire way across Kyrgyzstan. It's one of the friendliest countries I've ever been to. It was all hospitable. Everyone took really good care of me. I got invited into a lot of homes and yurts along the way, but everyone was unanimous in their opinion that I would fail, that I couldn't do this. And that was something that I hadn't foreseen, that when you do something that's never been done before or something that no one's ever seen before, you know, most people I met hadn't seen someone who looked like me running around with this expedition backpack. When people have never seen it before, they generally believe it just can't be done. And so I was up against that every single day along this journey, even till the last 5 kilometers. And I was running on the highway to get into the southwest city of Osh. And I just had a few kilometers left to get through the city gates, and then the whole thing would be a success 25 days later. And even on that last stretch of highway, there were cars constantly pulling over, telling me to get in, that they would give me a ride because it was simply too far to get these last 5, 4, 3 kilometers to the city. So when I finally made that, it was a really huge moment for me. It gave me so much confidence and inspired me to keep going and to pursue this challenge, to run across a mountain range on every continent and learn about mountain cultures all around the world, and also challenge myself to do these really big runs. But alongside that, I'm also trying to promote other people in their adventure stories and diversify the adventure industry. So I launched a book last year called Tough Women in Adventure, and that's an anthology of a lot of women from diverse backgrounds and diverse sports that share adventure from a different angle. That's completely valid. It's just not the one that maybe is typically seen in mainstream media. And that's the other reason why I love working with Sidetracked, is that we share adventure stories from all around the globe, from all different types of sports and backgrounds and perspectives. And the thing that ties us is a love of adventure and the outdoors and the concept of exploration. And that's me. Thanks very much.
Hello, my name is Alex Roddy. I'm the editor of Sidetrack magazine. I'm a long-distance backpacker and a reformed Scottish winter climber. And I thought I'd like to chat a bit about how I got from where I started to where I am now, and how kind of mountain stories play a role in that. So like many good stories, it started off in the Boots Bar at the Clackaig Inn in Glencoe, which is a famous climbers pub, and really quite a kind of setting of legends in the Scottish mountaineering community. And after I graduated university in 2008, I was at a bit of a loose end. I knew I didn't want a career in computer science, which is what I studied. I wanted to do stuff that was outside. So I'd already had a couple of seasons of alpine mountaineering experience. I'd been up to the Scottish Highlands a fair bit for, you know, hill walking and wild camping and so on. But when a friend suggested, you know, why not take this job as a barman at the Clackaig, I jumped at the opportunity. And I thought, you know, why not just go and live in the mountains for a couple of years, which is exactly what I did. So from 2008 to 2011, I was living on site at the Clackaig, pulling pints in the evenings and pretty much climbing, hill walking, mountaineering non-stop on my days off, which was fantastic. And at that time, most of the other live-in bar staff were passionate climbers, so you could always find someone to go on the hill with. And I spent a lot of time climbing on Bidgin Nambian, which is the local mountain, over the Anakiga, all over the Nevis Range and the Cairngorms, and just having a lot of fun, really. And I think at first I was very much in that typical climber space of being focused on grades and summits and tick lists, although I was never really that strong a climber. But even so, I liked to push my grade. And gradually that started to change. And I think it was being rooted in one place and going up the same mountains many times that started to do that. And I started being a bit more interested in the journey itself, the kind of the story. So I would look for days out that started, in the valley, incorporated a bivouac or a wild camp. And I just gravitated towards soloing these easy low-grade routes and kind of like halfway between backpacking and climbing, I suppose you could say. And yeah, this is a direction that I've taken ever since. So life took me away from Glencoe. In 2011, I moved back down south, and I continued to visit the mountains, of course, but I was working as a mobile phone salesman at Carphone Warehouse, which I was rubbish at. I was useless at selling phones to people who didn't want them. And I started to think, I need a career. I need to do so again. I need to do something that's outside. And my epiphany came in 2014 when I was trekking in the Alps, and I decided, I'm gonna start a career as an outdoor writer, as an editorial professional. And so I joined the Society for Editors and Proofreaders. I became qualified as an editor, and I started pitching my stories to magazines. And these stories were all based on my experiences in the mountains. So the first big one that I had published was the following year after I'd hiked the Cape Wrath Trail. And this really marked a watershed in my outdoor activities. So before then, most of my mountain trips had involved at least an element of climbing. But from the Cape Wrath Trail onwards, I was really focused on long distance walking. So this trail starts in Fort William in the West Highlands of Scotland and extends for about 250 miles through the mountains, through a huge amount of bog, quite a few hills, up to Cape Wrath at the northwesternmost point of the British mainland. And this was the first route I'd done of this length, anywhere near this length. And also the first trip that I'd done in a reasonably lightweight style, carrying a light pack. A lot of the climbing I'd done before had, of course, put me in the right frame of mind for this, because when you're going up steep cliffs, you can't really be carrying heavy weights. So I'd already kind of started to get used to this mentality, but the Cape Wrath Trail and subsequent trips really kind of turbocharged it for me. So over the following few years, I did a lot of trips to Scottish Highlands, mountain ranges in Europe, such as the Alps and the Pyrenees. And I started writing regularly for TGO and other magazines. And I'd also become sub-editor at Sidetracked. So Sidetracked attracted me because it was so focused on those mountain stories that so kind of inspired me personally. The Sidetracked publishes the kind of stories that I like to read about. And a lot of my private editorial clients were writing similar kind of books, books about climbing in the Himalayas, books about these epic long distance trails. And I wanted to work on these impressive stories. So sub-editing Sidetracked for several years was fantastic. And meanwhile, my backpacking aspirations grew. I started going down the ultralight rabbit hole. So essentially taking minimalism to the extreme, seeing how light you can go with your rucksack. And it all kind of came to a head in 2019 when I did 2 trails that really changed my life. So we had the Cape Wrath Trail in winter, which was February. It wasn't as wintry as I'd have liked. So it started off with a fair bit of snow and ice, which was lovely. But the trail became much more summery towards the middle and the end. And in fact, I had better weather than a few years previously than when I'd hiked it in summer. But that for me was kind of a culmination of my winter backpacking aspirations. And in July that year, I hiked the Haute Route Pyrenees, which I'd been dreaming about for years. And that's a 500-mile long trail across the crest of the Pyrenees, Atlantic to Mediterranean, and it was just wonderful. And that was my first really ultralight trip of anywhere near that length with a very, very light pack. And I learned a huge amount about myself, about the mountains, about why I go into the mountains, and why other people go into the mountains as well. And of course, since then, the pandemic has more or less stopped play, unfortunately, in terms of really big trips. So that was my last really long trail. But fortunately, late last year, I was offered the job of editor at Sidetracked. And after so many years of kind of working on the details of these amazing stories from our very talented contributors, it was great to be able to start kind of teasing the stories apart and kind of building them up and really getting to the truth of why people head into the mountains. So yeah, we're starting to work on volume 21 at the moment, and I'm really looking forward to being able to travel internationally again, being able to, head up to Scandinavia, back to the Pyrenees, and do these big impressive routes. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Jenny and Alex. And I'm absolutely delighted to say they're joining us this evening. I've got a few questions from you and also from myself. Hi, Jenny. Hi, Alex. Good evening.
Hi. Nice to see you.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Really interesting talks and also really inspiring. I've got a few questions. We've got some questions coming in, but I just wanted to start off just to ask you both individually. You're very outdoorsy people. You like to explore and go somewhere new. And obviously, we've had a bit of a tough 12 months. So how's lockdown been for you? I'll start off with you, Jenny.
I feel really lucky that I've actually been outside pretty much every day, and I've still been able to do stuff. I mean, obviously, I had tons of plans that were canceled. I mean, I'm a professional adventurer. I travel all the time. So, but I've managed to not dwell on that and actually just enjoy redefining adventure and getting out for shorter efforts, but just changing them up in a way. So challenging myself in other ways. Like adventure is subjective. It's what you make it. So I've just been making the most of it, to be honest. I feel really lucky that it's been fine.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, I actually live somewhere quite rural, and so I've been pretty lucky that I've been sort of out and I've explored a huge amount of my local area, things which are literally on my doorstep. So Alex, what about you? How's lockdown been for you?
Well, I live in rural Lincolnshire, so like yourself, I'm lucky that I've got countryside on my doorstep. I've not been stuck in a city, but I do live a long way away from the mountains. So there's been very, very few mountains in my life for the last year. But I've been doing daily walks. I've been keeping up running, and I've really got into kind of wildlife photography and observing nature in my local area. So that's helped me get through it.
Yeah, I was worried that Alex was going to be humble on that answer, because if you go to his Instagram, there's lots of amazing bird photos that he just gets like the best. Like your wildlife photography is actually quite phenomenal.
Oh, thank you.
I knew you were going to skip over that.
As we leave, the very last thing I'll do is ask what your social media handles are so people can check you out. But thank you so much. I mean, hopefully we are now nearing the very end of the restrictions of having to stay local and be able to explore a little bit further afield. For those people that have found hiking and walking in lockdown, we had huge statistics of a huge increase in people getting outside and enjoying the great outdoors. What would you say would be key bits of kit? What do they need to think about? So if somebody wants to go hiking and they've been just enjoying it locally for an hour or two, they're going to go up for a whole day. What would you say, Jenny? What would be 3 top bits of kit for them to take or things to think about?
I mean, your jacket's pretty essential, and in the UK, that's a real waterproof. I mean, if you're going to spend money on one thing, I would say it is a proper waterproof, because like cheap waterproofs are just landfill items. Like you've got to get a good one. And then maybe not necessarily an item, but do spend some time on learning navigation. I think a lot of people are really intimidated by navigation because it seems really overly complicated, but actually it's way easier than you think. So get that out of your mind and just spend some time teaching yourself. There's tons of tutorials online if you can't get into a course, but navigation, knowing how to get yourself to help get out of places if you want to get out of them, knowing how to not get lost and spend 3 days in the woods when you didn't want to, that's essential.
Well, that's a top tip, and actually, we've got a resource, OS Maps, which I use, and has certainly got me out of some incredibly lost situations. I've been in the woods and not quite know my direction. I found that a really useful tool. What about you, Alex? What would you say? What would be your top three things for people who want to extend their hiking and walking?
Well, I'd say footwear is a really important one.
Yeah.
So it depends to an extent where you're going to be walking, but I personally favour lightweight trail shoes. You don't necessarily need to spend an enormous amount, but it does need to fit well. That's the key thing. So I think it's quite important to go into a store, and particularly one where they can professionally fit some footwear to your feet, because the last thing you want is blisters. Mm-hmm. And building what Jenny said, a compass is, I would say, vital. There are loads of electronic options nowadays that can help you navigate in the mountains. But if you're going particularly anywhere off path, definitely get a compass. It'll work without batteries, and also a survival bag. It could save your life.
You guys have gone straight into the extreme stuff. Really, survival bag, compass, know how to survive. That's really.
I'm not trying to be intimidating about this. Like, you'll be fine. But...
Yeah, that's amazing. Actually, the having good footwear and having a waterproof jacket. I mean, a waterproof jacket, it really could get you out of a lot of sticky situations. And also, there is a lot of tech now available to people. So that's really, really helpful. So I've got a question here, but where is going to be the first place you will go once we're out of lockdown? If you had a dream destination, somewhere which you really want to go hiking in, where would that be? Jenny, let's start with you.
So I'm working on my project to run across a mountain range on every continent, and I've still got one left. So I'm just
which one's left?
Europe, and my plan A is to do the Caucasus Mountains, and I've been planning that for a couple of years now, because that was obviously cancelled last summer. So if things are finished and we can run free, then Caucasus Mountains. I'm on the next flight to Georgia.
I mean, I saw Leveson Wood, and he was in the Caucasus.
Yeah.
I genuinely had never heard of them before. And his documentary, really made me want to go there. I think they're quite undiscovered in a lot of ways. So I will be living vicariously through you when you get there. Alex, what about you? What's your dream hiking destination?
Well, I'm writing a book at the moment about long distance backpacking in Europe. So I've kind of got a lot of warring priorities for what I might like to do when we can go back internationally again. But the two ones that I would really like to do is in Arctic Scandinavia. There's a long distance trail called the Nordkalotleden, which extends for about 500 miles through the Scandinavian wilderness north of the Arctic Circle. Wanted to do that for ages, and recently I've really started to like the look of the Grand Traversata delle Alpi, which is traverse the Italian side of the Western Alps. Looks stunning.
Oh wow! I mean, you two are like next level hiking. I've got a couple of questions, quite specific questions. But before I ask those, just if somebody sees, they're inspired by what you're saying, and you're doing some pretty big stuff in some extraordinary places. What would your words of wisdom be to them if they're sitting at home thinking, I don't know if I can do that? What would you say to them, Jenny?
I'd say start where you're at. I mean, Alex and I were into the outdoors for years, and we're both kind of young, but we've been doing this for a long time. We've built up skills by just raising the bar every time we go out till we got to this place. So I would say start where you are and challenge yourself, and you'll be really surprised by yourself.
Okay, don't limit yourself. Alex?
Yeah, and I'd say as well, definitely what Jenny said, but also, find more experienced people to go out walking with. Even if you don't personally know anyone in your immediate circle of friends, there's loads of online communities where you can meet up with other hikers. Not at the moment with the restrictions, but once things return to normal, make some friends who know more about this stuff and learn skills from them.
Brilliant, like-minded people. I've got a couple of questions, so we're going to have to keep this quite short to keep to time. Sure. A couple of people are asking questions about ultra-light hiking gear. It seems to be available in America. There are obviously great resources there. But if people are trying specifically to find something ultra-light in the UK, where's your go-to? Alex, I'll start with you.
Well, I tend to buy stuff from Ultralight Outdoor Gear. I think it's .co.uk, may possibly be .com. But they're really good because they list the weights of everything.
Oh,
so,
wow.
Yeah, and also I'd like
I'm writing that down.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Also Valiant Peak. they're in fact fairly local to me. They're a cottage manufacturer of ultralight kind of quilts and other specialist items like that. So they're worth a look as well.
Thank you. Jenny, you put your thumbs up. Is that in agreement?
Yeah, ultralightgear.co.uk is like the geekiest website. I love that you can filter things by weight.
I'm going straight there after this conversation because some of the races I do, things have to be super lightweight. We've run out of time, unfortunately, but Jenny, if you and I'll go to you. What's your social media handle and people can follow your adventures?
Jenny Tough, just my name.
Just your name, Alex?
It's alex.roddy. That's RODDIE.
Thank you so much, Alex and Jenny, for joining us this evening. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks very much.
Hey, I'm Jenny Tough. I'm an adventurer.
So welcome back to Outside and Active. We're having an evening all about walking and hiking. Don't forget, if you have any comments, please pop them into the comments box. And just a little reminder about our on-demand content. We've got OS Maps there showing you how to use their maps online. And also there's an outdoor guide on accessibility. And this evening is supported by Andorra Travel. We all now want to go to Andorra. Everybody here wants to go to Andorra. But with no further ado, our next speaker is Nicholas Crane. You probably recognise him from the BAFTA award-winning TV series Coast, but also I read in his bio here, he has walked 10,000 kilometres solo along Europe's mountain ranges. So really looking forward to hearing what he has to say. Next up is Nicholas Crane.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. And thank you very much to Nicholas Crane. We're delighted to be talking to you. So thank you for giving us a window of your day.
Not at all, Ashley. I'm very excited to be joining you.
Brilliant. Well, for those who don't know, Nicholas has written so many books. I've written here 10 books. Is that correct?
I think it's more than that, Ashley, but I don't actually count them anymore. I did count up to about 10, but I've stopped now. Yeah.
You stop now. So an author of more than 10 books. He's an avid walker and presenter. A lot of people might recognize Nicholas from presenting the BBC programme Coast, which is certainly where I know you from. So do you want to just give everyone a bit of an overview of your outdoor journey and what that looks like for you? That would be great.
Well, if you mean my outdoor journey from childhood to sitting in central London, it started with an Ordnance Survey map, not unlike this one here, of where I grew up in Norfolk, and my school bicycle. So I became an explorer at weekends, pedaling around the country lanes of Norfolk, and one thing led to another. When I was 19. I got on that school bike, I tied a sleeping bag, not unlike that one, onto the back of it, and I cycled from Norwich to Greece over took about 3.5 weeks to get to Greece, pedaling all the way across the continent. And one thing led to another, and I always wanted to write books. That was a big passion. I think it came from not being I wasn't very good at school, but I did like telling stories and I liked reading stories. So I ended up becoming a full-time writer.
Awesome. And in terms of your sort of work presenting, obviously Coast was a huge series on BBC. Where did that take you and what did that look like?
Well, we did it for about 10 years. And in fact, the first series was, when it was commissioned back in about 2004, was going to be the longest factual BBC series ever, I think. There were 13 one-hour programmes, and we made this extraordinary journey around the whole coast of the UK and made 13 one-hour documentaries looking at the people and the places around the edge of the UK. And it was an amazing adventure, and it was so successful. I think that the second or third programme had over 5 million viewers, that the BBC commissioned a second series and a third and fourth, and it went on and on and on for 10 years. And so we went round and round the coast a few times, and then we did the adjacent coasts of Europe. Then we went to Canada and all over the place. And it was an amazing experience for me as presenter because, working with the BBC on these shoots, each one was a mission, and they were very outdoors-ish. So I was always, with a rucksack and an umbrella because of the rain, and walking around coast paths or going out on lifeboats or fishing boats, going into lighthouses, working with the coast guards, having access to all sorts of places that you wouldn't normally get to see as a regular member of the public. So it felt very, very privileged, and it changed my view, particularly of our existence on this archipelago of islands in the UK.
That's incredible. And I've certainly rewatched quite a few of them over lockdown. And I think one thing that's really come back into the forefront of people's minds is just how rich the UK is, and what opportunities there are for great adventures on our very own doorstep. Obviously, coronavirus and lockdown has really made people so grateful for the opportunities we have to adventure and explore in the UK. Do you have sort of a favourite or a few top favourites of places you visited?
Do you know what, Ashley? I think the best way of looking at the British coast or the UK coast is to think of it as having a type of coastline to suit your every mood. So depending on what kind of mood I'm in, I would dream about going to a different part of the coast. So, for example, the coast of Norfolk, the Norfolk coast part, has almost no hills on it. It's very level. there are a lot of salt marshes, there are sand dunes. It's the coastline where at the beginning of Robinson Crusoe, the hero gets shipwrecked. It's a very romantic, level coast of enormous skies, sandbanks, and bubbling salt marshes, lots of bird life. At the other extreme, if I wanted real high adventure, I'd go and walk parts of the coast, for example, on the island of Skye or in Scotland, or perhaps the Welsh coast path. And Wales is the only country in the UK that has a coast path around its entire boundary. And I've not yet done that. So I'd love to go and walk the Welsh coast path.
Yeah, that's something to add to your list. What's the furthest you've ever sort of gone off and walked in one go?
I did once walk across Europe, following the mountain ranges of Europe from west to east. And that was a journey of about 10,000 kilometers of continuous walking.
Okay.
I was on my own. It was in the age before mobile phones and GPS. So I just had this little compass with me. Here it is. So that's the compass I carried.
Wow.
And I navigated by the stars, by this compass. I slept outside in the sleeping bag under the stars. Here's my water bottle. That's what kept me hydrated. I used to fill this up from mountain springs. And it took a year and a half, following the mountain ranges all the way across the continent. So I walked the length of the Alps in winter, all the way through the Carpathians in Slovakia, then Poland, Ukraine, Romania, into Bulgaria, then out through Turkey. And that was just the second half. The first half went the whole way from Spain through France, and then Italy, Switzerland, Germany, Austria, until I got to Vienna. So it was an amazing journey to do on your own. And as a writer, I found that I was never alone. I never actually felt lonely, because I had my little notebooks and I'd write stories in them every day. And I eventually turned those stories into a book called Clear Waters Rising, about the journey. And I look back on it with a lot of fondness, because it was an isolated time, but I learned a lot about the way people work with each other, because I was very high up in the mountains all of the time. So I was having to either buy or negotiate food and shelter from shepherds most of the time, and I learned that the less people have, the more generous they are. And that was a life lesson that came out of that.
That's incredible. And it sounds idyllic and so disconnected. I'm sure that it wasn't all highs, but in this world where we're so connected to everyone, we can be reached at a moment's notice, and everything we need is at the tip of our fingers. It sounds like a really idyllic experience just to have that solitude and that real grand adventure on your own and just going out to explore. Yeah, it sounds incredible.
It was, and you mentioned sort of being disconnected, and I never really got quite out of that habit. So every morning, although I'm in North London now, every morning I leave my phone in the house and I go for a walk on my own around the park, knowing that nobody can phone me up, and I can't start mucking about on social media or anything. I just have to kind of listen to what's out there and smell what's out there, feel what's out there, just for an hour or so before the day starts. It's a really special time.
And that's a really good tip, actually, because I think obviously we can talk about these amazing adventures and you've done incredible things, but actually for a lot of people, a walk around their local park is the most they've achieved in the last year, or the most they've been able to do. So do you have any other sort of tips about how stories about how the last year has been for you and how you've been able to just maintain that sense of connection with the outdoors during that time?
Yeah, the staying local rule has been, I'm sure it has been for everybody listening, it's been both a revelation and a trial. And for me, this map was important because it's the 1 to 25,000 ordnance survey map of northwest London. So it's got all the paths on it and all the housing estates and everything. So I just set off with that and start exploring. And actually, although I've lived in the same bit of London for 25 years, in our local park, during the very, very heavy rains a couple of months ago, I started seeing things I'd never seen before in the park, and I found what I think is a 500-year-old hedge bank, where in summer you can't see anything, but in winter you can just see a slightly raised ridge. And I matched it up to some old maps, and I'm fairly certain it's a hedge bank going back hundreds of years. And then only about 4 or 5 days ago, I found what I think is an old path or cart track across this kind of central London park. That must also be hundreds of years old. And I've walked this park every day for the last 25 years, and I've never seen them before. But the reason I found them was that I started thinking about what I could feel under my feet. And I started to sense that some parts of the park were boggier than others, softer in all this rain. And then I found there's a pattern to the harder parts, which is what this hedge bank came from, and the old footpath as well, or cart track. So I think it's amazing, when you're forced to, what you can start discovering. And now, when I go out in the morning into the park, I follow the line of what I think is this ancient cart track, rather than going on the tarmac paths in the park.
Yeah, that's incredible. So, and I guess it links back to what you were saying about actually just leaving your phone behind and having your feet planted where you are and being really present in what you're doing. And I think for a lot of people will probably be able to appreciate what you're talking about, because like you say, we've had so much time to actually walk around our local streets or our local parks or common land, whatever it might be. And I can really relate to that. I've spent a lot of time on our local common running, and I wouldn't have bothered before. I would have jumped in the car and gone somewhere else, and gone somewhere that felt new and adventurous. But actually, I think there is real value in just being able to get outside, and I've been so grateful for that in the last year. Especially in London, there have been so many people who haven't had that opportunity to actually get outside very much, and that must have been so difficult.
Yeah, I know that's really, and I think as a part of that is, I think, and I found myself needing and wanting to talk to people who are at random in the park, and without wanting, obviously be very careful about startling people and so on. But there are people who I've seen every day for years and never had a conversation with, and they live a few doors away. And that, in the current circumstances, it seems mad to carry on not saying anything. And I've made some really good friends.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I love that. I mean, I'm from the northeast of England, and everybody talks to everybody in the northeast of England. You can't go anywhere without stopping for a half an hour conversation. And I always really feel that difference. Every time I go home, I'm now shocked when people stop and talk, or you're out running or walking, and every single person says good morning to you. And I remember moving from the north to the south and being at the train station to go into London, and just starting to talk to people, and they look at you like you're mad, and like there's something wrong, like you're about to attack them. But actually, I found in lockdown, I agree, in lockdown there was that leveler, wasn't it? It was like, wow, it's a bit like when it snows, isn't it? There's just a shared common interest of what's going on, and everyone feeling like, wow, we're in this together. And I guess that sense of community has been built a little bit over the last year.
Every London community needs a northerner.
Yeah, to force themselves upon them.
It's true, yeah.
So obviously you've had a lifetime of adventures. Do you have any highlights? Is there anything that really sticks out in your mind that you would say, that really was up there?
There's a couple of things that I ended up doing that I've never written about. One of them was back in the 1980s, during the war between the Soviet Union and the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. I undertook a journey on horseback into the Hindu Kush Mountains on a humanitarian aid project. And it was a very difficult journey because the war was still going on, and I was with communities who had lost everything. Their houses had been bombed. They had not even enough food to get through the winter. And at one level, it was very distressing. At another level, it left me sort of struggling to know quite how to process the information. I mean, I was working for an NGO, a charity at the time, So I did my job for them. I had to produce a geographical report on the humanitarian requirements of internally displaced refugees in Afghanistan. So that was a straightforward work project. I was very focused on that. But beyond that report, I've never really written about it. And I'm kind of thinking, yeah, maybe I should go back and try and make sense of that. I think sometimes if you're a writer, you get presented with stories that take a very, very long time to, if you like, congeal, or just for the various parts to congregate in such a way that you feel able to make sense of them. And this has taken over 20 years, 30 years to slowly fall into shape. So the paradox was that the Hindu Kush mountains are one of the most beautiful places in the world. So I was riding a horse through spectacular jagged mountains covered in snow and ice, and past turquoise lakes, and I was with Afghans who are, among the most friendly and considerate people I've ever met anywhere in the world. People who had lost everything. They were living in refugee camps when they weren't working as guides in the Hindu Kush. And I think I experienced a level of humanity in a part of the world that is experiencing some of the most inhumane wartime activities. So that's something I think about quite a bit at the moment, going back in my head and making sense of that.
Yeah, that's something I would certainly love to read about. It is that disconnect sometimes, isn't it, from the physical surroundings you're in and actually what's going on a human level. Must have been, throughout your career as a presenter and a broadcaster, must be something that's quite hard to sort of align and think, okay, this is where I am and what I'm doing, and I'm having this adventure and it's beautiful, but actually what's happening alongside you from a humanity point of view, it must be a huge thing. Is that something that you cover in most of the books, or are the books that you've written primarily sort of adventure books?
No, they're not. They cover a wide range of subjects. My last book was really about climate change and about the value of geography as a subject that we ought to embrace, as if in the same way that we learn how to read and write. I think that we should all absorb geography at its most basic levels as a way of viewing the world, because it's only one of the great things that geography does is allows you to see all of the world's interconnected parts as a whole. And one of the reasons we're in the difficulty we're in at the moment is that we've moved into an age where there are lots of compartments or silos that have been set up as if one thing won't impact on another thing. Of course they do. I mean, if you're going to burn vast amounts of fossil fuels, there will be effect on future climate. And that's a complete scientific given. And yet we've been behaving as if the two are disconnected. And one of the great things about geography is it tells you how they're connected and how every action has an impact on other parts of these, if you like, these systems that the world is made up of. So that was my last book. It was quite a serious book, but I have written travel books. I wrote a biography of the world's greatest ever map maker, Mercator, who lived 500 years ago in the Low Countries and gave us Mercator's projection, and who designed the world's first atlas, among other things. So he was I'm very interested in maps. I think they're a way of, one of the things that Mercator believed in was 16th century humanism as he saw it, where he wanted to harmonize all the parts of the world, which of course is a geographical kind of concept, that everything should be working in harmony. And to answer your question, sorry, Ashley, I came at it in a rather roundabout way.
No, it's very interesting.
My own view is that, I mean, I've just been filling recycling bags with newspaper cuttings I've been collecting since the 1980s on climate change, and they are so depressing. Almost every month there's another apocalyptic headline, and that's been going on since the 1980s. And I collected all of these bags and these piles of categorized cuttings as if collecting the cuttings was somehow going to make a difference. Of course, apart from cluttering up my office, it's made no difference whatsoever. So I did eventually write this book on geography that was published a couple of years ago. That was my kind of attempt to do it. But I now realize that actually the way forward is not to frighten yourself and other people to death. but to look at the positive ways in which we can change the way that we live and the way we relate to the planet, that encourages other people to think about the future in a less fearful way, because our relationship with the planet is about adapting. We are that's the message, that we have to adapt to the various changes in the pipeline. But we're going to find it a much less difficult job if the changes are less extreme. So the big decision about whether to get on an airplane, whether to eat a meat-heavy diet, for example, you can do all these adjustments in your own home. But the real issue is political, and it really matters who we vote for. And that's the global message, that the changes required in terms of adapting to the climate are political. So it really matters who we vote in, because the systems are so enormous and have so much inbuilt dynamic that we need political energy to overcome the difficulties.
Yeah, so interesting. And, obviously the rise of all of the BBC documentaries with David Attenborough, and, it has kicked up that conversation. I have 2 young children, and we've watched them all, and then we've sat down as a family and thought, okay, what can we do? And even my 8-year-old brought up around the table, but Mummy, what do, after what he'd seen on the screen, he couldn't work out, okay, so we're going to eat half as much meat in a week as we normally do, and we're going to refill our bottles. And even his brain at 8 years old couldn't compute how that was going to help what he was looking at on the screen. So I think there is, in a lot of people's minds, we want to look after this world that we're living in. But there's that real sort of disconnect between feeling like, okay, we can do all of these small things, but there's something so much bigger that actually needs to happen here to protect the natural world and to, keep these outdoor spaces that we love exploring there for future generations. It's huge.
He's definitely got the right attitude already. So you've been doing some very good mothering there. I think the other thing, it's kind of a bit counterintuitive, because when you first think of it, it might seem a little bit tough to get your head around, but there's no reason why 8 and 10-year-olds shouldn't be introduced to the idea that they're going to have this vote before they reach 20, and that actually we need election manifestos to be written in user-friendly ways, so that we can identify the political manifestos that are going to create a more resilient, sustainable planet. Those are the ones that young people need to look at and identify and to vote for.
Such a good message, and that user-friendly side of it is so important. I mean, quite often we as adults look at them and we think, okay, I know what I think I want to vote for, and I know what I think you're trying to say, but I'm not sure if you're really saying what you're saying, and it can be very complex and very confusing, and that's potentially part of the problem in voter numbers and people actually not continuing and actually going through to vote. So that's a really important message. One thing I'd love to pull out is your love of maps. Obviously there's these days you're either sort of paper or digital. That's kind of the choice that people make. And map reading, certainly for me and for my generation, I've never been taught how to read a paper map. Are you very much still sticking firm with your paper maps? Have you switched to digital?
Yeah, I have switched to digital. I use them both a lot. So on the wall behind me here, that's one of Mercator's actual 16th century maps. Yeah. It shows the North Pole with a plug hole with all the waters of the oceans pouring down it, and 4 islands, or 3, one of them's missing now, but 3 islands at the North Pole. So I'm a great fan of maps, and I use these. I still use these. I've got about 3 entire sets of Ordnance Survey maps of Britain upstairs. That's about getting on for 600 maps upstairs. Wow. So I've got a lot of paper maps, but those maps cover 60 or 70 years. So I can open, depending on which series I look at, I can see how any one landscape has changed over the last 60 years, which is really interesting. So I use the paper maps for a lot of my writing. But all the time I'm using, I use the maps on my phone, and also I've just finished writing a book. It's going to be published in May, and I wrote it during a lockdown, and when I couldn't travel. I wrote it all in this tiny room at the back of a London terraced house, And I couldn't travel, but the book is about South America, about Ecuador. So I had to research the whole of the book on the web. I couldn't even go to the British Library, the London Library, the Royal Geographical Society Library. Everything had to happen in this tiny room. And I discovered that the University of Texas has an entire set of Ecuadorian 1 to 50,000 maps in its archive under open access. So I was able to travel across Ecuador digitally. And of course, using Google Earth. Google Earth, I don't know how many other writers are using Google Earth, but wow, what a resource. Because of Google Earth, I was able to, for example, the book I was researching was set in the 18th century. It was a scientific expedition, the world's first ever scientific expedition. And during this expedition, a team of French and Spanish scientists were camping on the top of volcanoes in what is now Ecuador. But on Google Earth, I was able to zoom in on the volcanoes they were camping on top of, and then go down to a kind of street view option. And I could stand on the top of a volcano in Ecuador and see the same view that they saw 200 years ago. Completely amazing.
It's mind-blowing.
I'm a total convert to digital mapping. And there's something that geographers are very familiar with called Geographical Information Systems, GIS, which are basically digital maps that you can layer one on top of the other. So you can create all of these layers. So, for example, a GIS map of London at the bottom layer might have Roman London. At the top layer, it might have 21st century sewer systems. So you can match up different layers and see how everything fits together on your screen.
Interesting.
It is completely amazing. So the future is digital. There's no question in terms of mapping.
And in terms of, so if people are listening and they don't know how to read a map, like me, I rely heavily on Google Maps if I'm going anywhere. Where would you say people should start? Obviously, it's a great skill to teach children and to encourage them to get outside. How do you get started with something like that?
Well, I would say in terms of going to shops or ordering online, you need two things. You need the map and you need a little compass. This is a compass from any outdoor shop. It's a silver compass, probably about £15 or something like that. And if you look at the Ordnance Survey website and at the Ramblers website, the Ramblers is the organisation that helps people go out walking. Those two websites will basically get you started. And it's very simple to learn to use a compass to navigate. It's great fun. If only to tell you, for example, where the sun is going to rise tomorrow morning, which is quite exciting, because I like to go and watch the sunrise in London from the park I go to, just because it's a great start to the day. And during lockdown, I was able to actually pinpoint with this compass the exact point on the horizon where the sun would come up, choose my spot on the hill. And through lockdown over the last year, the numbers of people going up this hill in London to watch the sunrise has gone from kind of 3 or 4 in the morning to up to 100.
I love that. And it wouldn't have happened before. People would have been commuting and rushing to work. And, there haven't been many benefits that have come out of lockdown. But I think that's a wonderful side effect, is that reconnection with slightly simpler things.
Yeah.
So we've talked a little bit about your walking adventures. We've talked about horseback, but I know you've got a bike behind you. So have you had many sort of cycling adventures?
Yeah, I mean, before we were limited to our local bit of town, I'd use that bike for going on day rides out to Essex from here. So there's a sort of 70-mile loop I can do from North London out to Essex through the country lanes and back again. But I've also done much longer journeys by bike. I once cycled from the Bay of Bengal in Bangladesh with my cousin Richard Crane. We became the first people to identify and to visit the pole of inaccessibility, which is the place in the world most distant from the open sea. And it's basically a grid reference in the Gobi Desert. And we went there from the open sea in Bangladesh. So we cycled through Bangladesh, India, across Nepal, over the Himalayas, all the way across to Tibetan Plateau, over the Kunlun Mountains, across the Gobi Desert. It took about 55 days or so. And on a bike very like that one, actually. It was basically a racing bike, very light. It was unsupported, no GPS. This is before mobile phones and stuff. And we just had a sleeping bag each and slept under the stars across Tibet and went to the Pole of Inaccessibility. So that was a bike ride of about 5,500 kilometers. But I cycled across Europe twice when I was younger. I cycled in every European country. America. I mean, I ride a bike when we're allowed to every day in London to go to libraries and go shopping and so on. It's a wonderfully liberating way of moving, and you can cover enormous distances. On foot, you can maybe cover 20 miles a day if you're really cranking it out. But on a bicycle, you can do 80, 90 a day. So it gives you an enormous range.
Oh, I'm so inspired just listening. I could literally talk to you all day just listening to all of your adventures. It sounds incredible. If people want to find out more and, follow your story, how can they do that? Do you have sort of social media or websites or anything that people can go and find out a bit more about you?
I'm on Twitter. I'm not a very good Twitterer, but if anybody does post on Twitter, I'll improve my Twitter habits and respond. And then I have a book coming out called Latitude. It's coming out in May, and that's about the world's first scientific exhibition. There's an awful lot of mountaineering and horse riding in it, so it's quite outdoorish. And I used my own experiences of climbing volcanoes and dugout canoeing in Ecuador to write that book. So that's my latest book, which is a combination of geography, history, and adventure all rolled into one. It's a proper page turner called Latitude.
Sounds incredible.
Published by Michael Joseph.
Well, Nicholas, it's been so interesting talking to you. Thank you so much for sharing your adventures and your experiences and your knowledge. It really has inspired me to go and find out a little bit more and to learn to read a map. So thank you for your time and thank you for sharing all of that information.
And thank you, Ashley. You've brightened up a rainy London day. It's been a great pleasure chatting with you.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicholas Crane. Great to hear from you this evening. Just to say a big thank you to anybody that has written in a question or left a comment. We really appreciate you engaging with us. And so this evening has been all about walking and hiking. But before I leave you with our final virtual walk, I just want to remind everybody that we have got lots of on-demand content. Everything from last night is now live online. We've got Ben Fogle chatting. We've got Katie Jane talking about her hiking adventures. Everything from last night is now available, as well as things from OS Maps talking you through how to use their online map, and Andorra travel guide. And of course, there's also an outside guide on accessibility. So don't forget to have a little look at the website after you've had a look at all of the talks. So just going to think forward to tomorrow. So each night we've got a different theme here at Outside and Active, and tomorrow night is all about excursions. We've got a couple of live Q&As, so do tune in. We've got Elise Downing. I could talk to that lady all day. She's got a fantastic story. She basically ran around Great Britain. Extraordinary. We've got adventure filmmaker Frit Tam will be joining us. And then also outdoor adventurer Callum McLean. So that is the lineup for tomorrow night. So please tune in. We're going to be here from 6 o'clock until 8 o'clock, all the way through every evening until Saturday. But we've got a nice, relaxing Sunday evening treat for you next. We've got a nice hike, a virtual walk of Helvellyn with Nicholas Spronson. So I'm going to leave you with that, and we'll see you back here tomorrow. Good night.